Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Catherine Metzler and I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition therapist, and I am so happy to be here today. This is going to be the third video in the three-part series in which we're going to take a dive into sugar addiction and the research that's around it. And so if you're not super into science, that's totally okay, but what we're going to be diving into is some of the holes around the research and maybe some of the things that you haven't heard yet that could be impacting your view of whether or not sugar is addictive or not. So you may have heard a lot of talk recently about sugar being addictive, and there are a few things that are often pointed to, two of which we're going to talk about today that don't quite tell the whole story. So the first one is that there's a particular part of the brain that is often showed in brain scans when humans consume sugar that lights up. And that is used as a comparison to drugs like cocaine to use that as evidence that sugar is addictive. What isn't talked about is that's the part of the brain that also lights up when we experience pleasure. So we experience pleasure from consuming foods that have sugar in them, but we also experience pleasure from cooing at a baby, from hugging someone, from listening to music, from dancing. And so we wouldn't say, because that part of the brain lights up, you are addicted to dancing or you are addicted to hugging people. So the argument that because that part of the brain lights up when we eat sugar means that it's addicting just doesn't really line up. What it is saying is that we experience pleasure from that, which is another topic for another video in the future, so definitely stay tuned. And I would add, what isn't noted when we're talking about that part of the brain lighting up where dopamine is indeed released is that we've seen from the research that when we restrict foods, in this case if we were restricting sugar, that when we consume the food that we've been restricting, when we consume the sugar, our brain actually releases even more dopamine, that feel-good hormone, as a reinforcement to then seek out that food again. It's an opportunity for your brain to tell you, hey, this is something that we want more of. So we might experience even more pleasure from eating the food that is prohibited, which can actually lead us to feeling like we are out of control or that we're addicted. So it's important to know that that feeling is very valid that you're experiencing, and that there may be really good reasons why you're feeling that way. So the second important thing to note as it relates to sugar addiction research is that there is a research study that is talked about related to mice, in which they found that the mice preferentially chose the sugar over the other options that they had. So that study is often used as an opportunity to show that sugar is indeed addictive. What isn't talked about and is noteworthy is that those mice that chose the sugar over the other options that they had were the mice that were indeed deprived of food. So what does that mean when we start talking about humans? Well, that's an interesting thing to note and can be a video in and of itself related to how do we compare mice to human behavior. And in keeping that in mind, it's important to note that the environment in which food was restricted was the environment in which mice had an increased tendency to choose the sugar over the other options that they had. And so when we think about how we are nourishing and feeding ourselves and how much we might be restricting, that can influence the amount of sugar that you're consuming and your attraction to it, which we'll dive into in future videos together. But for now, it's something just to take note of, that the context in which the mice were deprived of food or not deprived of food matters, because that influenced the outcome of whether or not they chose the sugar or didn't choose the sugar. So I hope you found this video interesting and informative, and know that this is meant just to give a broad view of some of the holes around addiction research as it relates to sugar. If you like this video, feel free to give me a like, comment below, follow me on Instagram at Brave Space Nutrition, and I hope you'll stay tuned for lots more in the future related to food and diets and body image.